What's up, guys? Welcome back to Badasses of History. Today's episode is pretty graphic, so just a warning that if you're listening with kids, which I don't know why you would be, but if you are, might want to skip this one. But still, great story. Enjoy. On March 21st, 1990, a badass was born. His name was Ross Capicchioni, and he is one of the toughest kids you've ever met. In 2007, Ross was doing what any 17-year-old in Detroit would do. Hanging out, skateboarding, going to school, and chasing girls. He was just a regular kid living a regular life. On June 6th, however, that would all change. Ross grew up in Detroit, and though the city has a reputation of being a rougher area, he wasn't really that concerned about it. He was more concerned with being a teenager. At school, he had a couple buddies, but no real friends. One day, a kid he had known for nearly 10 years decided to start up a conversation. Before long, they were best friends and started hanging out regularly during and after school. Late July, his new friend asked Ross to drive him to his cousin's house, who lives on the east side of Detroit. Ross refused. In his words, the east side is a place where the cops don't get out of their cars. It's like a third world country, and you don't go there for any reason. For the next week, he would continue to say no, but eventually, on June 6th, he agreed. When he pulls up to the house, his friend urged him to drive around back. At first, Ross found this to be a little strange, but this was his friend after all, so he followed instructions. They park, get out of the car, and when Ross turns around, he's stopped by a loud gunshot. He ducks, thinking, this is exactly why I didn't want to come to this part of town. He gets to his feet and looks down to notice his arm bleeding. Ross attempts to raise it, only to realize it's almost completely blown off. He looks up to see his friend pointing a shotgun at him. Ross is in complete disbelief and shock and asks, "Did you just shoot me?" The air is knocked out of him when another shot goes through Ross's chest. The sawed-off shotgun just put a hole the size of a soup bowl through him. He falls to his knees, looking down as the blood starts pouring from his body. Ross still can't believe what's happening and is unable to fully register the severity of his situation. Just then, he feels the barrel of the shotgun put on the back of his head. Almost in slow motion, he smacks the barrel as the gun goes off. He avoided his head exploding from the blast, but it still tore his scalp back. Ross falls to the ground and stares into the eyes of his killer. With a smile, the murderer takes the butt of the gun and smashes Ross in the face, knocking his teeth out. He then proceeds to rummage through his pockets, take the car keys, and speed off. Ross is completely alone, lying in a pool of blood and barely conscious. For a moment, he pauses and thinks about dying. He wonders what his family will think, what the funeral will be like, and where he's going to end up in a few minutes. He starts feeling very tired and wants to go to sleep, but convinces himself he needs to get up. If you sleep, you die. Attempting to stand, his arm snaps and he falls on his face. The pain is overwhelming, and Ross begins to see the end and embrace it. Just then, he feels hands pull him up under his arms. Terrified, Ross swings wildly at the person trying to help him, but there's no one there. He falls, and again he is lifted to his feet. After he walks a few yards, he feels a hand shove him from behind just a little further. At that point, he collapses and begins to close his eyes and go to sleep. Right before Ross passes out, he hears a man screaming. As he opens his eyes, he's being embraced by another man who is telling him to stay awake and that help is on the way. Ross recounts this part of the story in third person. He said he left his body and was on a skateboard filming the entire process. He filmed from outside the ambulance all the way to the hospital. When they pulled his body from the vehicle, his out-of-body experience ended and the lights were out. Ross was gone. He was pronounced dead on arrival. A doctor had been called in while Ross was on his way to the hospital, and when he heard he was dead, the staff basically told the doctor to go home. There's nothing you can do. Well, the doc was a little irritated that he drove all the way there for nothing, so he said, "No, I'm already here. Let me see what I can do." Within minutes, Ross had a pulse. Hours later, with a couple surgeries, he was lying in a coma with no certainty that he would ever wake up. 3 days later, however, he did wake up. It was all hands on deck when Ross awoke, and he was surrounded by wandering eyes staring in disbelief. When a nurse asked him his name, he couldn't answer. The year, the president, no idea. The staff still had no clue who this kid was, but for some reason he remembered his father's phone number. Once his parents arrived, things started coming back to him and he gained his memory. Ross was discharged from the hospital in just 5 days. The doctor wanted him to be able to go home and rest versus being stuck in a hospital, so he sent him on his way. Within days of his release, police officers showed up to Ross's home asking if he knew who had shot him. This kid was his friend, so of course he knew. They pulled out a picture, Ross confirmed, and they informed him that the young man was already in custody. Apparently, the murderous teen was so excited about what he had done that he called a friend to brag about it. His friend immediately called the police and ratted him out. SWAT showed up moments later and took him in for questioning. Within days, there was a hearing, and Ross showed up to testify. He appeared in a wheelchair, head stapled shut, no teeth, and still periodically bleeding from his chest, but still gave his testimony. Months later, Ross returned again to a final sentence hearing. The killer showed up in a purple suit, top hat, sunglasses, and a pimp cane, smiling the whole way. Dozens of his family members cursed Ross. They called him a coward and cheered on their murderous relative. Regardless, Ross gave his testimony again, and the judge gave his final ruling. He told the young man that he should thank Ross, because if it wasn't for the fact that he was such a warrior and he would have died, the sentence would have been life without parole. But because he survived, the ruling would be 35 years. When it was all said and done, the purpose of the violent and horrific attempted execution was a gang initiation. Blood in, blood out. There's many gangs that have been speculated in requiring a random killing in order to be initiated, and Ross found himself in the middle of one. Now, if you go online and try to find real information on the story, you won't be able to. Both parties were minors, and therefore have had their records sealed from the public view or redacted. This has led to many people speculating that Ross made it up and that it was just a drug deal gone bad, but I personally don't think that's the case. Drugs often change hands multiple times before the sale, so more people attached to the story and more people to debunk what actually happened. There's also the recorded phone call of the killer bragging to his friend. Not to mention, the murderer, his friends, and his family all have ties to various gangs. Regardless of how it happened, Ross was shot 3 times by a sawed-off shotgun and lived to tell about it, making him one badass kid. Alright guys, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, then make sure to subscribe. Tell your friends. Thanks.